All right, well, this was episode 35 of the Clive Barker podcast. Jose and I talked about the Hellbound Heart. And not only did we talk about the Hellbound Heart, but all of the news that's built up over all these interview episodes that I didn't get a chance to get to because we don't really do the news on the interview episodes, mainly just because we don't want to bore them with, that stuff. So anyway, all that news that's built up, we did all of that. So this ended up being kind of a long episode, but it was pretty good. We came up with some pretty thoughtful discussion about the Hellbound Heart, and inevitably it was compared to Hellraiser because I think when you're talking to Clive Barker fans, you can't help but compare Hellraiser and the Hellbound Heart. And I think that most people can identify with Hellraiser. So anyway, this is episode 35 of the Clive Barker podcast, The Hellbound Heart. Welcome to episode 35 of the Clive Barker podcast. This is Jose.
Hi. Hey, guys.
And I'm Ryan. And today we're going to be talking about the Hellbound Heart. So this is the novella that inspired Hellraiser, or that Clive adapted into Hellraiser. But first we'll go into the news, the Clive Barker news. The first one is he's got a 12-part comic book coming up that he wrote with Mark Miller called New Genesis.
Oh, yes. That sounds really interesting. It involves God, right? Like, yeah. God is... wait, what was that? He comes to Earth again or something?
I think that's right. Yeah, and I think it's sort of the details are purposely vague right now, but It seems like it's kind of a retelling of Genesis. Mm-hmm. Like a modern retelling, but I don't know. I mean, it's Clive Barker, so it's going to be unique. I'd heard that this was kind of a novel that he and Mark Miller wrote together, and then they adapted it into this comic book.
Yeah,
I've the final form that it took.
I read about it in a few websites a while ago. And then, of course, Mark Miller has been writing several issues of the latest incarnation of Hellraiser's comics for Boom. And now he's co-writing this new series. It's about a man who claims he's God returned to Earth. So, like you said, apparently they got this story done together after Mark Miller became a living canvas for Clive. Well, but this is actually Mark Miller's words. This is something that Clive and I sort of came up with together. I volunteered to be a living canvas for Clive, and when he was finished painting me, what we had was Wick, the primary antagonist of New Genesis. So he's entirely Clive's creation, but from that moment on, both Clive and I were obsessed with finding out who this character was and what his intentions were. Through tossing ideas back and forth, we came up with a brutal story that really stuck with both of us. And as it turns out, Wick's intentions are less than benevolent anymore, and I risk saying too much. So, apparently if you look at Clive's Tumblr blog, and I've seen Mark Miller in one of the pictures there, if you see him like painted, it's probably Wick. So,
okay.
There you go.
I think I have seen that before.
Yeah,
and Clive painted the painting on the cover of Hellbound Hearts. That's the anthology of the people writing stories that are inspired by Hellbound Heart. Mm-hmm. That cover was a painting. Mark posed for that painting.
Okay, that's another nice bit of trivia there.
Yeah, and that's different from being painted on. But I'm sure it was probably done around the same time.
Yeah. New Genesis is also going to be drawn by artist Haimi Yang. So that's the artist that's going to be drawing the comic. Mark Miller goes on to say that Haimi's influence is incalculable. Her work bolstered the series by freeing us to take bigger visual risks. So knowing that we're in good hands and that she'll be able to pull off the big picture stuff has allowed us to do some really incredible stuff with the narrative and the comic form itself. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
so
looking forward to
that. Hopefully, usually there's been a lot of there's been some cover art I think that's been revealed. So this is probably pretty close to being available.
Yeah, and just another update from Mark Miller, because he recently said on March 4th in an interview to fearnet.com that they asked him, I understand you've been working with Barker on his highly anticipated Harry D'Amour / Pinhead project, The Scarlet Gospels. Oh. Can you give us an update on where that stands now? And as early as March 4th, which was just a few days ago, he said, it's in good shape. I've been highly involved in the editing process for some time now, and it's a brilliant, beautiful, terrifying story. At the moment, Clive's main focus is on Aberrat 4, but Gospels continues to be a big part of our world. It will happen, and when it does, I assure you, it will have been worth the wait. So that's wonderful news there.
Good.
I'm one of the guys who has been really, really anxious to know more about when is the Scarlet Gospels coming out, and I know that we have other friends out there who feel the same. And they really want to see it.
And one thing that Mark told me in when I was talking to him about a year ago about Scarlet Gospels, and something that sort of blew my mind is that I said, okay, so it's got Harry D'Amour and it's got Pinhead. What is the continuity of this? And he said, Clive Barker always has, and we've talked about this before, but he says Clive Barker always wants the continuities in the same media to follow each other. So all the comic books connect together, all the novels connect together, and all the movies connect together.
But they don't necessarily cross-connect.
Exactly. So Scarlet Gospels is a sequel to Lost Souls, The Last Illusion, and Hellbound Heart.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that ties into our main topic today too. So that's kind of cool. And the next thing, I guess this is a smaller piece of news, but the story Lost Souls is going to be reprinted in the Mammoth Book of Angels and Demons.
Oh man, that's great. I mean, I know I've only read it online because that's the only place I've ever found it. But it's great to know that it's going to be back in print, because it's a great story. We've discussed it in the previous episode, and I just love that story so much. It's the first time I ever read anything involving Harry D'Amour, even before I bought the Books of Blood.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think I read, because the first book I read was Cabal, and the American edition of Cabal has Books of Blood Volume 6 in it, so I read Last Illusion really early. In terms of like when I read all of Clive's stuff, that was the first thing I ever read, and then I didn't realize that was Books of Blood, and I just thought it was some stories they jammed onto the end of Cabal to make it thicker.
Yeah, it's funny because my first book from Clive was also Cabal. Yeah,
but you have the UK first edition, right?
Yeah, I have the the one I read first was the paperback that I bought in Canada when I was in Montreal. And that was a standalone. But at the end of Cabal, what it had was an excerpt of Imagica. No, wait, it wasn't Imagica. It was Weave World. It had an excerpt of Weave World at the end. Yeah, so that's why the next book that I got, I think, was either The Great and Secret Show or was Weave World. I don't remember. But yeah, just a little aside there.
It looks like we just got another comment that I need to add into our notes. But yeah, so that's cool. I mean, I think now we can buy Lost Souls and actually support Clive Barker, which is kind of neat. We haven't been able to do that in a long time.
So it's the Mammoth Book of Angels and Demons?
Yes.
All right. Cool.
And the next thing, Alex. I'm kind of guessing this is more Alex's doing, but Clive Barker is obviously behind it as well. But the official Hellraiser Facebook page
Oh, yeah.
Just got started. So that's really cool. They've been posting all kinds of images, and I know you've been a big contributor to that, right? You've given them a lot of cool stuff.
I guess so. I just did a big post once with a big album full of the best images that I had from Hellraiser and scans and stuff. So I guess they shared a few. That's great. That's flattering.
I thought that was pretty cool. And then, so that's that one. You know, if you're on Facebook, and a lot of people are, you should find official Hellraiser and like it. And one thing Alex has said is that it's gotten the attention of Dimension Films.
Really?
Where in the past they never wanted anything to do with Clive Barker, and they wanted to make the movies on their own. Now they're suddenly paying more attention to the interest in Hellraiser. So maybe this is a positive step towards, more official Hellraiser movies. I mean, I know those are official, but they are and they aren't.
I really hope so, because, there are a lot of fans there. Hellraiser is a seminal movie from the 80s.
Yeah.
It was seminal in the way that it rescued horror back from black comedies and things with, like, campy, I mean, at that point, in the 80s, I guess that the horror movies were, like, done in kind of a black humor kind of thing. Like, you had... Yeah. And then you got Hellraiser. Opens up with a hugely powerful sequence, like a punch to the gut. And you get, like, the Cenobites. They're putting together some guy who's laying in pieces on the floor, and then it's like...
it's a punch to the gut, but it also really teases you, and you wonder what is going on.
And like,
what is this world that we're going into?
Yeah, and the Cenobites, looking all majestic and menacing, fascinating, sexy, and scary at the same time. Yeah. That really resonated with a lot of people. And instead of just having, like, some typical monster going, like, cracking jokes, or some hulking figure that just kills for the sake of killing, just for a slasher film or something. The Cenobites are actually really refined creatures. They have a certain hellish sophistication, so in that aspect that broke the mold and where monsters were concerned in horror movies at that time.
Yeah. Well, and then so the next one is there's a Followers of the Pandorix. That's Eric Gross's project. His book, The Toymaker's Magnum Opus, has a Kickstarter, and I did a post about this before. So the previous post on our website, you can find the link to that. And another one is Ill Willed Productions made the bust of, if you're on Occupy Midian, you've probably seen it, the bust of Narcisse. Oh yeah,
it looks amazing. And Narcisse is pulling his face out, pulling his scalp out. Yeah.
And that bust, I actually got to see that at Monster Mania. Well, actually, it's kind of funny when I was packing up all my stuff, and I was, like, worried that I was gonna, miss my plane, and I was gathering all my stuff together that I had hidden behind the Occupy Midian table. My backpack almost knocked that bust over on top of Ann Bobby.
Oh my God!
Somebody had brought these little dogs over, and she was like, "Oh," and she, look at these little dogs, and she was kneeling down in front of the table.
Yeah,
with these dogs, and I'm walking out, and my backpack, brushed up against the thing, and somebody got scared that it was going to fall on Ann Bobby, and ran over and grabbed it.
Jeez, can you imagine that?
Yeah, but it was a really cool sculpture, and he plans to do more designs for Nightbreed. So this is a good Kickstarter also.
Okay.
And then also the two upcoming, well, actually 2 out of the 3 upcoming screenings of the Cabal Cut are crowdfunded. So the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival in Portland, Oregon in May is being crowdfunded right now. So I'm kind of hoping that you and I can go to that one.
Yeah, well, let's see how things go. Yeah, sure. Yeah. I'm going to do my best to attend the Portland, Oregon one, but let's see how things go.
Yeah. And then,
just did a big move to the United States from Portugal. and things are still falling into place. But I'll do my best.
And the next one, Oz Horror Con in Melbourne, Australia. They're crowdfunding that. That one's not Kickstarter; it's something else similar. But yeah, that one's getting put together also by crowdfunding.
So, just a question here, because I've seen this. I've seen, for example, the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival. Mm-hmm. The poster for the screening of the Cabal Cut says "Support the festival via Kickstarter." So is this Kickstarter supporting the whole festival or just the?
I think it's the whole festival.
Oh yeah, sure.
And I haven't bought tickets yet because I want to learn what day the screening is going to be, because I don't want to buy tickets for all 3 days, and I don't know.
That's another thing that we need to let people know. It's which day is it going to be?
Yeah. Russell has said that he thinks it's just going to be one of the 3 days, but we don't know when yet.
Okay. All right.
The next one is the Labyrinth. It's a Hellraiser site that's also based out of Australia, and they've been teasing that it's going to be coming up, I think, on May 1st, early May anyway.
What is the address for that website?
It's http://labyrinth.me.ht.
Okay.
And
all right.
Yeah. If you go there right now, you just see like a logo and hear Hellraiser music playing. But they've also done some teaser videos. One of them stars Nicholas Vince, and it's supposed to have interviews with Hellraiser cast and crew, and be sort of an all-around Hellraiser-related website. And it seems like they're also pairing up with the Pyramid Gallery.
I just shared that video with Nicholas Vince on Facebook the other day, and I hadn't had time to check out the Labyrinth yet. I just did while you were talking, so it looks amazing. They got the whole labyrinth, the whole maze thing, and you can see the shape of Leviathan.
Really faintly over on the right side.
Yeah, well, looking forward to this. I wonder what's going to come out of this.
Yeah,
so
it's interesting.
Yeah.
And then one more quick little thing, Roger's website, the forum.
Fifth Dominion?
Yeah, the Fifth Dominion. He's put the domain name on it, clivebarkerfans.com.
Yeah.
So now that should be hopefully easy to find, and we hope to talk to more of you on there.
Yeah, the forum, and you can stay updated on Clive News there as well, because Roger puts up some regular updates as well there.
And if you want to contribute news and stuff too, he's got little links where you can put news in.
Let me just do a quick aside, just to give people the address for the official Hellraiser Facebook page. In case you're looking for it, it's facebook.com/official.hellraiser. So there you go. It's got a beautiful banner, and and then you have a message here from that's been pinned to the top from Clive himself. I guess it was when the page got started. It says, "Hello, my friends. This is Clive talking from my writing room in L.A. I'm taking a break from writing Aberrat 4 to say hello and welcome you to the only official Clive Barker run Hellraiser site. This is the only place on the planet where you're going to be able to find the facts as far as we can ascertain them in this world of duplicities. And of course, always spiced up with my own, often somewhat controversial opinion. This will not be a studio site. This will not be a platform for any particular opinion or critical point of view. It will simply be Barker and the Beast, here for you whenever I'm awake to have some fun and cause some trouble. My love to you always, Clive, XOXOXOX. So there you go.
That's great.
Finally, an official, Hellraiser website.
Yeah.
Well, Facebook page anyway. So that's great.
Yeah.
What else is on the table?
All right. Well, that's it for news.
That's great.
We can transition from official Hellraiser right into the Hellbound Heart, which is the story that started it.
Yes, the Hellbound Heart, which is a really nice, perfect little novella. I think it stands as one of the best things that Clive ever wrote, apart from Magica, of course, but I'm biased about Magica. I really, really enjoy the Hellbound Heart. It's a book that it's so easy to read, and at the same time, it's so well written. I mean, it's just an amazing little piece of prose. I just love it so much. I read it several times. Probably one of the Clive Barker books that I've read like more than 5 times.
One line that really, I was rereading it again last night and this morning, and one line that really got to me, I thought was really cool. And this is a description of the Cenobites, but from Frank's perspective, before he meets them. So it says, summoned from their experiments in the higher reaches of pleasure to bring their ageless heads into a world of rain and failure.
Yeah,
it's so awesome because it's kind of true, but it's also what Frank really hopes that these creatures are, and it turns out it's different.
That's true. Yeah, it didn't overlap with his definition of pleasure.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So, I was refreshing my memory, and the way it opens is just an amazing opening. It opens up with Frank trying to solve the box, and then it goes back from there to talk about how Frank got involved in finding the box, what drove him into finding the box.
Yeah.
Basically, Frank is in his appetites is pretty much monstrous because he's a man who has pretty much no moral code. He's an hedonist. I mean, he's a nihilist and a hedonist. He just wants pleasure for the sake of pleasure, and he feels so burned out. At one point, he almost becomes suicidal until he discovers Kircher, who tells him about the lament configuration, or the Le Marchand's box, as it is described.
And they study everything there is to know about it and read every accounting of it. Together, him and Kircher, and you kind of wonder. Kircher's not quite the same kind of character that we see in the movie Hellraiser.
Are you talking about the so-called puzzle guardian?
Yeah.
The guy who turns into a dragon at the end. Spoilers. Yeah. Well,
exactly. I mean, we're assuming that he was kind of a Kircher type character, but evolved kind of on his own path.
Yeah, even though in the novella, Kircher is more like it's almost like a teacher, isn't he? I mean, he's more like it's like he's a pusher trying to sell some drug, but at the same time, he's like educating you on how to properly, take that drug.
Well, and you have to wonder, I mean, Kircher knew all this stuff about the box, but obviously he'd never opened it himself.
I guess not, because otherwise he probably wouldn't be talking to Frank.
So you kind of wonder, it's kind of like Dr. Chenard in Hellraiser 2, somebody who really, really wants to learn about the box, but is too scared to do it himself. So he found somebody.
That's actually a good point that you raised. I mean, I never thought about it that way. I mean, I wonder if there was an agenda behind Kircher. I wish we had known more about this character, because it seems like I would really like to know more about where he found out all this stuff. They do mention reading the diaries of Bolingbroke and Gilles de Rais. Gilles de Rais was a real character, was a real person, a real historical character. He was, an alleged child murderer, I think. So Gilles de Rais, I think that was more like mudslinging, political mudslinging, that attached that fame to him. I'm not really sure, because he does have the reputation of being a serial killer. So I have no idea. I don't know much about this. Maybe our friend Barbie Wild, with her encyclopedic knowledge of serial killers, could shed some light on Gilles de Rais. But he was a Breton knight, a leader in the French army, and a companion in arms of Joan of Arc. So I don't know how accurate is this description of his, of being a serial killer. But
and it's also mentioned a little later in the book too that there were other types of configurations, and there was one that the Marquis de Sade had that was like a origami. And there are a few that were hidden in the vaults of the Vatican or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So really cool, and of course this sparks the imagination of all kinds of people that want to, explore the Hellraiser universe more thoroughly.
Oh yeah. So yeah, basically this is probably the best movie adaptation ever made of one of Clive Barker's books.
Yeah.
Even though there are some main differences, which are really tiny, in the dynamics between the characters and some of the names. Mm-hmm. For example, in the movie Hellraiser, Kirsty is Larry's daughter.
Yeah.
In the Hellbound Heart, Kirsty is Rory's
friend.
Crush or friend. She's got a crush on him, but she's a real shy. Well, she's basically, I think Clive actually described her as basically a loser.
Yeah. And it's funny that Julian can tell, obviously, that Kirsty just hangs around because she's got a crush on Rory.
Yeah.
But Julia doesn't feel threatened at all, and in fact, she's just kind of rolls her eyes and gets annoyed with her all the time.
Yeah, in fact, there's a point in the novella where it says, Julia always looked at Kirsty so strangely, as if faintly baffled by the fact that she hadn't been smothered at birth. That's really that says it all right there.
Yeah, so she's kind of, I guess, a frumpy kind of shy person who never could say anything right, and was uncomfortable in social situations, and I think maybe more of a person that we could identify with as an audience.
Sure, yeah. Even just making tea appears to be something that she's not even good at, because it says here that whatever task Kirsty had to do, it was never simple. It was always complicated.
Yeah, it took her 15 minutes to find the teapot or something like that.
Yeah. We do see some of an echo of this scene in the Hellraiser movie when Kirsty is opening the faucets to make some tea, and the faucet pops out and water starts sprouting everywhere. Yeah. But
and it's, I think that that she was an interesting casting choice in Hellraiser, because she is pretty. She's she is, but she's not glamorous in Hellraiser at all.
Yeah. I mean, she's just supposed to be more of a daughter figure than an actual than a third wheel in a love triangle. Yeah. So, and she was 18 or 19 when she was cast to be. And it was but we're not talking about Hellraiser.
No, we're gonna do that another time. It's hard. I mean, we're not gonna be able to avoid it completely. Obviously talking about the Hellbound Heart. Because I think there are a lot more of our audience that have probably seen Hellraiser than have read the Hellbound Heart.
Yeah, but anyway, so it opens up. The novella opens up similarly to the movie, but
there are some key differences also in the puzzle box and the Cenobites.
Yes, the puzzle box is not as pretty as we see in the movie. The puzzle box is just 6 black lacquered faces. It's just described as being a black box where you could not even see the parts that composed it.
And it takes an obsessive effort.
Dedication. Dedication
to get it open, which is the obsession, I think, is the key to getting the box open.
And I really love the way that it describes after Frank succeeds in opening the box, or I might be mistaking it for Kirsty's opening of the box, where at one point the pieces start sliding into place and they start sliding out and sliding, and then all of a sudden the box just comes apart and all the parts just float up.
Yeah, I think that was on Kirsty's one.
Yeah. And then they just
and I hadn't remembered that until just reading that part this morning.
Yeah. So
but yeah, that was really cool. And then it was hovering above her hands, and then it kind of collapsed and put itself back together when the Cenobites appeared. I
guess if the movie had been done now, they probably would have done some CGI thing and make it much more fantastic than the box with someone underneath the set just raising up a wand, flipping it over, and pushing it back down. But But it works. It works as well. I mean, I much prefer the box of the movie than the box that is described in the novella, for example.
Yeah. I mean, it's not as interesting looking.
They do mention Le Marchand in the novella, but they leave it pretty vague, I think deliberately. Yeah. So it just says that in his time, Le Marchand had been a maker of singing birds, and that he had constructed the box so that opening it tripped the musical mechanism, which began to tinkle a short rondo of sublime banality.
Yeah.
And, so Frank opens the box, and the Cenobites are different, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
They're slightly different.
The main one who does most of the talking is not Pinhead. He's a guy that's got hooks in through his lips and hauling his eyelids back, hooks and little chains.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, I think he's more of the lead Cenobite.
He is.
He's also the one that appears by himself to Kirsty later on in the hospital.
He was, yeah. But the second Cenobite is the one that's closer to Pinhead, because he is described as having a voice light and breathy, the voice of an excited girl.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to say every inch of its head had been tattooed with an intricate grid, and at every intersection of horizontal and vertical axis, a jeweled pin driven through to the bone. And also that its tongue was similarly decorated. Mm-hmm. So, and that's the second Cenobite, which eventually became, Pinhead.
But Pinhead in the movie has kind of more of a booming, commanding voice.
Yeah, and not a light.
The Cenobites all have sexually ambiguous voices in Hellbound Heart.
Yeah, and then the third Cenobite, I think that I might see echoes here that would, eventually become the Chatterer, because it said its features were so heavily scarified, the wounds nurtured until they ballooned, that its eyes were invisible, and its words corrupted by the disfigurement of its mouth. So it's kind of similar to Chatterer, I guess.
Yeah. I think it may be a combination of Butterball and Chatterer together.
Yeah,
because
and then
it's got big bloated, wounds that have covered up its eyes.
And then the fourth Cenobite is a woman.
Yeah.
And she has a hooded robe, and she only appears after the first trio have finished, talking to Frank, and then because there's a difference between the experience of opening the box in the movie and in the novella. In the novella, basically what is described is that the person who opens the box needs to strike the bargain with the Cenobites first. So it's almost like implied that you need to accept what they will bring you. It says,
and not only that, but they make him repeat it. It's like, are you really, really sure that this is what you want to do?
Yeah, and
so it seems really fair. I mean, they're a lot more fair than they are in Hellraiser.
Yeah, especially in the later sequels where the box pretty much just opens itself, and it's like, hey, we're here,
Yeah.
So, but they do make him accept. Do you partake of our offerings? Yeah. And he says yes twice, and then after that, what happens is that he has this overloading of the senses. He has this thing where just a cockroach walking through the floor sounds like an elephant, like stomping on, it's everything is much more enhanced and multiplied.
Senses. Like he sees a tick on one of the severed dove's heads, and it winks at him.
Yeah, that's funny because they don't have eyelids. But anyway, I'm just kidding. Yeah, but it's amazing. I mean, he just starts remembering all these sensory memories. I mean, he remembers all the times that he embraced a woman. He remembers sucking at the womb. He remembers, the sour milk, and he remembers all this stuff. And the world kind of, melts away, and he just he just there's a point where it becomes too much, and that's the point where it stops, and then when he opens his eyes again, he sees the fourth Cenobite.
The female.
And
she says, "Are you all done dreaming?"
Yeah.
And so it's kind of, and it's like, now we can really get started, because that part before was nothing.
Yeah. So, and then we guess that this is what the process, the beginning of the process that turns Frank into those scraps of human flesh that are stuck in the wall when Julia...
And she's sitting on a pile of severed heads, right? And,
yeah, she's sitting in a pile of rotting human heads.
And there are tongues on her lap. And when she stands up to walk over to Frank, all the tongues fall down it says like a rain of slugs, I think.
Yeah.
It's like...
And all the tongues are pointing at her pubis on her thighs, so that the elaborate scarification of her pubis was displayed, which I'm not even going to imagine what that was like. But, and then there's another one. There's supposed to be a fifth one, which is referred to as the engineer, which would arrive should the moment merit. Yeah. And I'm guessing the engineer is the guy, I think this is described in the novella, as the guy who came up with the machines and all that stuff. And he also has the role of, safeguarding the box. I mean, because, and this is a spoiler, of course, at the end of the novella, when Kirsty survives the events at Ludovico Street, and she's coming out of the house after escaping the whole, Cenobites taking Frank and killing Julia and all that stuff. She finds this, she's walking down the street, and she sees this figure with a glowing head and like a pyramid, like a fiery pyramid or something. Yeah. And it just bumps into her, gives her the box, and just sneaks away and disappears into the night just as he bumps into her. And she sees that he gave her the box. And the box is there. It's all clean. It's all back together again. And she can see like the figures of the souls of Frank and Julia, and they're like still in the reflections. They're like, inside the box or something. So that's a cool scene.
It reminds me of Hellraiser sequels where somebody is given the box and they know everything that happens with it, but they just can't help opening it anyway.
Yeah,
and that always drives me crazy, and it makes me wonder though in the Hellbound Heart what Kirsty would do with the box now that she has it, because she can't just throw it down, because then she'd be responsible for whatever happens to the next person that finds it. Yeah, well,
what she would do with the box after Hellraiser, because, and of course this is non-canon for me because this is the movies. I don't consider, from now on I'll just consider canon for Hellraiser the stuff from the Hellbound Heart and the stuff that's coming up in the Scarlet Gospels, because we're in the literary world right now.
Yeah, so, there's book canon and there's movie canon. And they're different from each other. In
the book canon, this never happened. But of course, Hellseeker, Kirsty, has the box. She's married to a guy named Trevor, and he dares her basically to open the box again, and she does. Even though, which is ridiculous, of course, which of course is ridiculous, but she does open the box on a dare from her husband, and she talks again to Pinhead, and she's going back, even though she knows exactly what happens when she opens the box. Yeah. So, there's that.
Her father was killed because of that box.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, yeah, okay, if you say so, I'd rather...
Yeah. But I always figured the box would have this kind of effect on people, much like the One Ring from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings had on people. The box will seduce you. It will start putting things in your mind. It will start making you want to open it. And
that's kind of what happens in, I hate to say this, but in Hellraiser Revelations.
Oh, okay.
The box acts like that, and it whispers to people. And the crazy thing is, like, if somebody's about to open the box, then all the Cenobites, then Pinhead, it zooms in on him, and he turns his head, you're like, oh, somebody's going to open it, hell exists inside of the puzzle box.
Yeah.
I think that they should shake it up and see what happens to Pinhead.
It's like Pinhead bouncing around inside, going like,
turn it upside
hell
down.
Of damnation.
Stop that.
Yeah, well, Peter Atkins, who wrote the script for Hellraiser 2 and 3 and I think 4, well, he did do that Wishmaster series. Have you ever seen Wishmaster?
I've seen just the first one.
Okay, well...
I want to see more of them, but they're hard to find.
Yeah, well, the gene lives inside the gem, right? And inside that kind of like that rock or something. So, I guess, sometimes people have this idea that it's like the genie in the box. So maybe some people think that Pinhead lives inside the box, and once you rub the box, he comes out of the magic lamp, in this case the magic box.
I think people that don't carefully read the story or try to take much care in learning about Hellraiser, or that's probably what they think.
Yeah. But so basically the rest of the story is very similar to the movie.
Yeah.
And you got Julia, you got Rory, you got Kirsty, of course.
And Frank.
And Frank. But so Kircher is supposed to have met Frank in Dusseldorf in Germany. They study the diaries of Bolingbroke and Gilles de Rais, looking for information about the Cenobites. Kircher sold the box to Frank for small favors, which we were never really told what those favors were. We're guessing petty thieving and maybe some other stuff. And he gives them the instructions to some of the Cenobites, which are described as part pragmatic, part metaphysical. He gives them advice like that the box is like opening the box is like what was the exact words? It's like it's not a destination, it's a journey or something like that.
Yeah.
So
and he'd also given him more practical advice to have the jar of urine that had 7 days worth of urine in it, and the bowl of doves' heads and the flower petals on the floor.
Yeah, the jug of urine was in case they required some self-defilement.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like and he had cleaned the room he was in. He put petals on the boards. It's like he's expecting like angels, and he what Frank expected, and this is described in the novel, would be like a living carpet of bodies, and the angels coming in with offering pleasures and all that stuff. Yeah. And then he's a little disappointed when he sees these ragged creatures that show up, and start talking to him like, "Hey, what city is this?" It's like, and he doesn't even answer them, and he goes,
"Yeah, I wanted to know what city it was when they asked that."
Yeah,
I guess reading it again, and it's been a while, so I was like, "Come on, Frank, just say what city is it?" Yeah,
I guess Clive just wanted to leave this every city like vague, so it can be anywhere.
Yeah, and he does that sometimes.
Yeah, but then Kirsty has this dreamy, perpetually defeated manner. And we get to know in the story, in the novella, we get to know the names of the two moving men that are helping them move the stuff into the house.
Oh, geez, that's right.
Yeah, it's called Mad Bob and Luton, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder which one was Oliver Smith and which one was the other guy.
And because this was a story, it's not as the events aren't as compacted as they are in the movie. So the event of Rory spilling the blood on the floor in the upstairs doesn't happen for months after the move.
Yeah. And in the meantime, it's like Julia only had these strange feelings whenever she walked into what they call the damp room, which was the room where Frank had been ultimately sacrificed by the Cenobites and trapped in that room. And in this book, what we see is that people are not taken to that cinematic hell where they're locked in a chamber in the middle of the labyrinth. They are left in the place where they summon the Cenobites, and they're perpetually gazing into that room.
Yeah, it's like a cell that's just behind the wall, but they're allowed to see in.
Yeah.
So that they can be sort of, it's like, well, when we're not busy torturing you, this is where you can be, so you can torture yourself looking at the world that you can never be a part of again.
Exactly. And it just so happens that while he's there, Julia walks into the room, so he starts hatching this plan that he might gather up some energy or some kind of scraps of willpower to be able to reach out from across what they call the schism.
Yeah.
And he does that at one point. I guess maybe fueled by seeing Julia there, he manages to come across, and Julia sees the wall kind of like lose solidity and kind of like fade away a little bit, and then she sees this horribly mangled creature, and she recognizes Frank, I think, and he only has the power to say one word, which is blood.
Well, I think he says 3 words. It's like Julia, and then something, and then blood.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
but it's enough for her to take some time and think about it and figure out what she needs to do.
yeah. And
Because just like in Hellraiser, the blood, Rory had an accident. He was chiseling paint off of a door hinge, and some noise outside made him skip the groove on the chisel, and it went right into his thumb and cut a 2-inch gash across his thumb.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I said he gathered the will to talk to Julia, but it's the blood. It's Rory's blood that gives him the power.
But even with that, he only had. You're right. He only had enough power to make that one connection to Julia, and that was it. If he didn't get more blood, that would have been the end of it.
Yeah, and then he says Julia. He says Julia. Then he says it's Frank, and at the end he says blood.
Yeah.
So. And Julia kind of goes a little she can't even believe that really happened, and she feels like this, because she's been having this notion that she's been having these memories of Frank every time she walks into the room, but she doesn't know why. So I guess that when she sees that thing, she starts to realize that there might be more to it than just a feeling, and that's when she becomes certain that Frank is somehow stuck in that room.
Yeah.
And, because sometimes she hears the bell, she hears like a bell ring when she walks into that room.
Yeah, and she thought it was some kind of a church service bell.
Yeah, and then she thinks that Frank is a ghost. She thinks that he died, and, he died in that room because he had been there the previous summer and is now awaiting exorcism. And,
Yeah.
So and then
it's interesting. I mean, is he alive or is he dead? Is he undead? I mean, he's also kind of a vampire.
He is,
Yeah.
and I guess he's not just a ghost, because ghosts are just spiritual creatures, and he actually has some scrap of humanity left, some scrap of flesh.
And the description of him, he's different in the Hellbound Heart, as when he first gets Rory's blood, he's like a spine with a head and an eyeball.
Yeah, that's pretty creepy right there.
Yeah.
And but the reasons for Julia to rescue him are still the same. She still had sex with him on her after the wedding.
Yeah.
Over her bridal gown, and
she's obsessed with him in the same way that Frank is obsessed with the configuration, right? I mean, she thinks that her life is boring, and she sees him as an escape into an exciting world that she wants to be a part of.
Yeah, she can't stop thinking about him, because I guess she was conformed to the idea of spending a married life with Rory, but then after she meets his brother, it's like he opens up this new world of feeling and this new world of appetites and
when you
possibilities.
And when you hear Frank's perspective on it, it's like, well, I could have taken Julia with me, but I would have just kicked her to the curb after a couple of weeks anyway, and then I would have had my brother angry at me and coming after me.
Yeah.
So it's like I just left her alone after that.
Yeah, because that's the nature of Frank. The nature of Frank is that he has these huge appetites, but then he just gets bored of things really quickly. That's what drives him into finding the element configuration.
And he has no feelings for people at all. It's just what they can do for him.
No, yeah, he says here that he had been to Hong Kong, Sri Lanka. He had gone to the East. He had tried everything. He had tried every kind of drugs and stuff. And then he says a downward spiral began. He spent 3 months in a wash of depression and self-pity that bordered on the suicidal. But then he doesn't even kill himself, because he thinks, well, if there's nothing worth living for, then there's nothing worth dying for either. So, I guess the death of a snail would be more glorious than his own suicide.
Yeah. I mean, it's a nihilism where I guess that's also kind of metaphysical, right? Because he's like, he just is thinking maybe the afterlife isn't so great either.
Yeah, I guess he doesn't even believe in that. Mm-hmm. And it's like, then he doesn't really know where he first heard of Le Marchand's box. Yeah. Like maybe in a bar, maybe in a gutter, or from the lips of a fellow derelict. And then he says he called this the route to paradise, and he said that there were several, he was told, charts of the interface between the real and the realer still, made by travelers whose bones had long since gone to dust. I really enjoy the way that the Cenobite says that the box is a means to break the surface of the real.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really cool thing.
Another interesting thing is that in the Hellbound Heart, it says that it's only like a handful of people have ever opened the box and, been taken away by the Cenobites. But in Hellraiser, Kirsty says, "You've done this before, right?" And Pinhead says, "Many, many times."
Yeah. So, I don't know. I mean, it's I guess the movie's expanded on it to a good extent and to some success, at least in the first 3 or 4 movies.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I would like to know more about Kircher. I don't know if Kircher is going to be in the Scarlet Gospels. Maybe not, because I have the feeling that it's going to focus more on Damour and stuff like that. But
yeah, and what this effect of all of this has on him. Yeah,
but then Frank is described as being a guy who had, heroin smuggler. He had, a thief, a derelict,
and he would come home and brag about it to his parents.
Yeah. And then it says here that after he gets the box, he had never in his life been so abstemious or so single-minded. In the days before the onslaught of the box, he led a life that would have shamed a saint, focusing all his energies on the ceremonies ahead. So, and then, this is all revealed in a part where Frank is like thinking about thinking about where he got to where he got.
Yeah.
And
stuck in the wall and just...
Yeah. So, yeah, the Cenobites are described as having hopelessly, flawlessly ambiguous minds, and they recognize no principles of reward and punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that he had tried to appeal for mercy from the Cenobites whenever they would torture him with the machines that the engineer created, but then they would not care. They didn't care. There was no compassion. And apparently what he suffers is so horrendous and at the same time so intense that just for a moment, just for an hour without dread or a breath's length, he would cry tears of joy sometimes. So that's in the movie I think it's more like pain and pleasure indivisible, but in the novella it looks like the pleasure was all but too brief, and then all you get is the torture.
Yeah, until there's nothing left of you, and they just leave you behind.
So the thing is, a lot of people think that they would give you pleasure, and then that pleasure would cost you some pain. But in this case, in the book, it's more like really, it's the exquisite nature of suffering that the Cenobites offer.
Yeah. And that's what I've always thought, is that just it's really not really about pleasure at all.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how you interpret it.
Yeah, so it's like if you tell someone since they're born that yellow is blue, then they would say that yellow is blue. They don't even think of it as yellow. And I guess it's the same thing here. I mean, if you think that pain is pleasure, then giving you intense pain would be giving you intense pleasure. So... Right. It's just that Frank's notion...
If it's so intense that, if you were living in the normal mortal world that it would kill you, then it's sort of beyond... It's not something that can kill you in the world of the Hellbound Heart, right? So it's a kind of an experience beyond the limits of anything that could happen in the real world. So this is... You can't really describe it in terms of is it pain or is it pleasure, because it's not going to kill you, and it's more intense than anything you can ever go through in real life.
Yeah. And then there's also described in the novella that, and I particularly like this part, that it describes that there were ways to escape the Cenobites. loopholes in the system that might allow a mind supple or cunning enough egress into the room from which it had come. And then it says, if a prisoner were able to make such an escape, there was no way that the hierophants could follow. Yeah. So, okay, so far so good. I mean, you come out, then the Cenobites can't catch you.
Because no one's there to open the box.
Yeah, they have to be summoned. So without being summoned, they're just, left on the other side. Mm-hmm. And that's why, Frank... And here's something, which is... Okay, so the thing is, Frank managed to escape because, and this is something that we didn't mention in the beginning, he had left some of himself on the boards of the room. He had left some semen there because when he's being overdosed with sensuality, he strokes himself and he ejaculates and it falls on the floor.
Right.
And that's like an anchor that allows him to also be able to rebuild himself and to,
it's like it's like having a toehold in the real world.
Yeah.
And it's, and in Hellraiser, I had thought about that too. Was that there but not something that they talked about? Or did it just seep through the floorboards and get into his heart that was underneath the floor?
Yeah, I guess that was probably it, because we do see that there are leftovers under the boards. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. But, so, anyway, the story moves on to the similar, storyline from the movie, which is that eventually Julia becomes determined to save Frank. She goes out, she tries to seduce men, she takes them home, she hits them with a hammer, Frank drains them of their energy.
She stabs them with a knife.
Or in this case, she stabs them with a knife, yeah. And I'm sorry, I got the movie and the
reading it now, I cannot stop from putting the actors in the places of those characters.
Yeah, I know. And it's so intimately interconnected in my mind that sometimes I might mention something that's in the movie and I could swear it's in the novella. So,
well, and this is going to sound like sacrilege, but we had the same problem with Rawhead Rex because the story and the events of the movie were so similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah, although the ending is completely different.
Confused.
Yeah,
which is a terrible thing to say, but I mean, the movie wasn't super well made, but
luckily in my case, I haven't seen the movie that often, so I go to the graphic novel, the Eclipse graphic novel, which because the ending of Rawhead Rex is completely different from the story. Yeah. But anyway, so Julia's killing men with a knife. Frank is draining them of their blood. And, of course, Julia starts getting a little strange, and Rory starts sensing that there's something off with Julia, and he confides to his friend Kirsty, and she says, "Okay, I'll stop by and see if I can talk to Julia."
Yeah,
and
to her, it's like, anything I can do to help Rory because I want him to like me.
Yeah, and then it just so happens that, of course, Kirsty happens to stop by the house at a moment where Julia's just finished killing another guy, and
so she's all sweaty, and she said she was sleeping, and Kirsty's like, "I don't think you were sleeping."
She sees
like you're cheating on him.
Yeah, because she sees a raincoat of the guy. I think she sees a raincoat of the guy hanging from the hallway, so she thinks, "Oh, well, Rory's at work, so whose raincoat is that?"
So where this is different from the movie now is that she leaves because Julia says, "I don't want to talk to you right now. If you're here to see Rory, you and Rory can do whatever you want. I don't care. Just get out of here." And so she leaves, but then she thinks about it and says, if he's really cheating, in her mind she's thinking, if he's really cheating, I need more proof than that. So I'm going to come back and investigate.
Yeah. And it just so happens that they... Yeah, and I particularly like the way that they refer to one of the victims. They call him the lamb. Yeah. And, it's like the sacrificial lamb.
Yeah.
So, and this is the guy that...
This lamb.
Yeah. And that's the guy that we see in the movie. Again, I'm going back to the movie. The bald guy that's like really nervous. And he goes, "Oh, I've never done this before." And then she takes him into the room. And then he says, "Oh, there's no bed." And she says, "What's wrong with the floor?"
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then...
that's all really similar. That guy. And then...
he needs to go to the bathroom. The door is locked. And she takes out the knife. And, and stabs him several times, slices at his belly.
He knocks the knife out of her hand. He grabs her. He's like pulling on her hair, and she's like, oh man, I could have done this better.
Yeah,
he almost overpowers her, and she stabs him in the back like 4 more times before he finally goes down.
Yeah. And there is that scene where Rory comes home a little sooner, and she says, "Oh, give me brandy because I'm feeling a little sick." And then she comes down.
Yeah,
and
that's pretty really close to the movie.
Yeah, even the scene when Frank is resurrected now and he's in the ceiling, in the attic, in the damp room. And he's pacing around, and they're watching something on the TV downstairs. Rory and Julia. And he hears a noise. He asks, "What was that?" And she's like, "Oh, that's nothing." And he goes, "No, I definitely heard something up there." And he starts going up, and she decides that the only way she can, get him to stop is just to start making, advances towards him in the stairway. And then he goes, and the
difference between the movie and the book here is that Frank was the blinds had been nailed to the window, and he was pulling them off so that he could see out the window.
Yeah,
he was tired of being sealed up from the world, and in the movie he was just pacing around and banging on the wall and yelling.
Yeah, and another difference is that Julia and Rory do end up consummating their act while Frank watches, whereas in the movie, of course, Julia starts saying that no, because she sees Frank moving towards Larry with a knife, and she's saying no because she doesn't want him to kill her husband right on top of her. But anyway, in this case, she sees that Frank is like spying on them, and then it's time to get some skin because Frank needs to take some skin, and then he says, "Oh, there are ways of, which I guess imply that there are some supernatural ways of getting someone's skin."
Yeah, and this was because things were sort of accelerated. He said that after Kirsty discovered them. So it's kind of like, oh, well, no, we got to get out of here right now.
Yeah, because it says, before the gash comes after me, the bastards who,
because they're afraid Kirsty's going to tell the police, and she's going to want to warn Rory first, and Rory comes home, and she's like, oh, I've got something to show you, and brings him upstairs. But yeah, so Kirsty had come in, and this was really interesting. Like, she heard screaming, and so she snuck around to the side door of the house, I think, and she comes in and she sees a guy, or this guy had stepped out onto the landing, and Frank had yanked his jaw off, his lower jaw.
Oh yeah, that's pretty intense. Yeah, the guy who Frank does that to is the guy that they describe as White Tie.
Yeah,
and I think it's White Tie.
Well, no, this was the religious guy.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's true.
He was like, oh, what we're doing is wrong, and God sees us, and He won't forgive us and stuff. And she's like, all right, just get up the stairs.
Yeah. I'm sorry. It's because I think the movie has some.
It's a montage in the movie.
Yeah, it moves things around a little bit. So again, I'm remembering some things that probably are like this in the movie, but not the book. Mm-hmm. But so like you said, and then he says, "Oh, I'm Frank." It's brother Frank because he can't say Uncle Frank because it's not Kirsty's uncle here. But it's brother Frank because they met at the wedding.
And he does say, "Come to Daddy."
It says, "Come to Daddy," yeah. But there's one line I'd like to address here, which is when Julia is talking to Frank after the scene where Rory almost finds Frank and she seduces him and they make love, and she's talking to Frank afterwards when Rory's asleep. And she says, he heard you. And he says, I needed to see the storm. That's why he was trying to remove the nails that were pinning down the blinds. And then she says, Frank says, I want to be out there. I want to have it all again. And Julia says, I know. And Frank says, no, you don't. You have no conception of the hunger I've got in me. Yeah. So that's a good line there.
Yeah, and it's kind of like she's probably thinking, the hunger to be alive again and to be a real person. But really he's thinking, I want to be like I used to be. and just go
right.
pleasure and, step on people and do just be frank again.
Yeah. But anyway, so going back to the point where Kirsty finally goes into the house and she meets Frank as he's feeding. What happens is there's this kind of funny at the same time scary exchange between them. Like when he says, it's Frank, this is brother Frank, and she doesn't want him to touch her, and he's going like, oh, don't be cruel. And what's to be frightened of? And this is a guy who has no skin, of course.
Yeah.
And then he says, well, a man's got to eat. Surely you can forgive me that.
Yeah.
It's like it's great.
And another one is when she picks up the box and she cracks him across the head with it, and he's like, give me that box, and she says, say please, and he goes, please, and she goes, no.
Yeah, and she finally stands up for herself in that scene. It's a pretty empowering moment, I think. She doesn't know at the time that the box is important. She just thinks it's a keepsake.
Weapon. And she does a lot of damage with it. She cracks his skull.
Yeah,
he doesn't seem to really care, though. I mean, I think there's something a lot different from a person that comes back from the schism. Yeah.
So this is pretty close to the movie, and so she runs out. She goes outside the house, and she picks it up and she runs, and then of course she just eventually collapses on the floor, and she wakes up at the hospital again. Yeah. And this is where she finds the Cenobites, and this is where she strikes the deal to say, there's a man called Frank Cotton, and
Yeah, and she opens the box more easily than Frank because there's blood in the grooves, and so it's not just a completely smooth face. She can actually see where some parts connect because there's blood in it.
So she kind of cheats a little bit in that regard. Yeah. But also the only guy who shows up is one single Cenobite.
Mm-hmm. The one with the hooks and chains that we talked about before.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's standing there talking to her, and a nurse comes in and she's like, hey, you should really get some sleep.
Yeah, nobody can see the Cenobite except her, which is kind of a cliche. I mean, we've seen this happen several times in movies and stuff. It's like when someone's talking to a ghost or an apparition, it's like, oh, they can't see me or hear me. Yeah. It's like, I was like, okay, well...
And he abandoned that in Hellraiser. That's not the case.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in the movie script for Hellraiser, one of the drafts would actually include her boyfriend, Steve, the guy who she meets at the dinner party when when Larry and Julia move into the house. Mm-hmm. He would show up at the hospital, and the Cenobite would appear behind Steve, and he couldn't see it. So that would be an echo. Yeah, yeah. In fact, if you read one of those drafts, you would see that Steve would be in the room when she opens it.
Steve really didn't get much of a part.
No, yeah, he just gets punched in the face by the engineer in the movie. But anyway, so the Cenobite says, "Okay, well, you opened the box and didn't know what the box was, but there's nothing you can do.
We have to take somebody."
Yeah, we have to take somebody, which is kind of like against what we saw in the beginning of the book.
Because he has to agree.
Yeah, because he didn't ask her to agree to anything. He's just like, well, you opened the box. Now we have to take what's ours. Yeah. And she says, no, I won't go with you. And she tells him about, of course, after the nurse goes, she tells him about Frank Cotton. And she says, does the name mean anything to you? Don't you want to know where I got the box? It was Frank Cotton.
And he says, I don't care where you got the box. And she says, well, but he escaped. And he says, are you telling me that you want us to take him instead of you? Yeah.
So he says, Frank wanted pleasure until we gave it to him. Then he squirmed. And then he says, so you're proposing what? That we take him back instead of you? And she says, yes. It's like,
why not? Yes.
Tempting, but perhaps you're cheating me. Perhaps this is a lie to buy your time.
Yeah.
And then she says, well, I know where he is. He did this to me. So she shows the wounds that she got from fighting Frank. And he says, well, if you're lying, deliver him alive to us then. and make him confess himself. And maybe, and this is the iconic line, maybe we won't tear your soul apart.
Yeah.
Of course, here it's said a little more matter-of-factly, but, in the movie it's one of the most memorable moments.
Yeah.
So she does go back, and then, Frank has taken Rory's skin. He has killed and skinned him, and he's wearing his skin. And she doesn't know that. She thinks that, it's still Rory. And, of course, it's pretty much like the movie. He says, well, it's all right now, Kirsty. It's Frank talking with Rory's voice. It's okay, Julia told me everything, I had to put my brother out of my misery, and then she's starting to freak out because he thinks, oh no, they killed Frank. Now I don't have anything to barter with for the Cenobite.
And they believe that too, because they start tightening their grip on her. She could hear the bells more loudly. Like something had looped its intestines around her neck and was tightening it.
Yeah, and then something starts whispering her and say, "You lost," and it's like and then of course she finally realizes that Frank is the one inside Rory's skin when he says, "Oh, it's all right. Come to Daddy," and she goes like, "What?" And she realizes it wasn't Rory who was speaking to her; it was Frank.
Yeah.
And she
when
says,
she realizes it, the Cenobites kind of realize it too, because they sort of loosen their grip.
Yeah,
but they're not helping her because they won't do anything until he confesses, and it takes her a while to realize that.
Yeah, and then he says, of course, he ends up saying, I think it's, well, at the beginning he's like, well, from now on I'm Rory, I'm Rory, nobody's going to know any better. And then she starts to feel like the air is getting thick, and she starts to feel like she can't see straight, and she almost starts to see she has this oppressive feeling like she's being almost taken by force, and then she realized, wait a minute, they said they wanted him to confess himself. Yeah. And then she says, "You're not Rory." And then he says, "Well, we know that, but nobody else does." Yeah. And then she says, "Who are you then?"
And he's like, "Oh, poor creature, you've lost your mind."
Yeah, and says, "Yeah, everything's going to be all right." And she says, "Yes." And he says, "Yes, Frank's here, baby." "Frank?" And he says, "That's right, I'm Frank." And boom! That's when, the Cenobites show up, and you hear the bell ring, and a Cenobite calls his name lightly as if calling a child out to play.
Yeah, it's like, Frank.
Yeah, Frank. And it's like, that's great. That's just I wish they had done that in the movie. I wish they had asked like the female Cenobite or something to just go like, Frank.
Yeah, instead it was like, Frank.
Yeah. It's like, no. Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway.
And he's like, you set me up. In the movie, he says, you set me up. But in this one, he's like, you put this together. Or something like that. Something similar.
It's more like, whore, bitch, cheating fucking bitch. That's what he screams at her.
You arrange this, and she nods.
Yeah. So, and then, of course, the Cenobites put their chains and hooks in him. Yeah. And the Cenobites just tell her to go.
They told Kirsty to leave, right? They said... Yeah. They didn't say, this is not for your eyes. They said something else that's similar.
They said, go. They just say go.
This is no longer your business, I think is the line.
Yeah, he says, get out of here. This isn't your business now. Yeah. And then they stick their hooks in Frank, and then another Cenobite says, go. Yeah. And then she goes. She goes, and
this scene is exactly the same, right? She takes one more look back and sees that he's being pulled apart.
Mm-hmm. And then the torso goes one way, the limbs go another way, and the head gets out of the shoulder. And then she closed the door, and something thuds against the door from the other side.
But instead of saying Jesus wept, which was an ad-lib by what's his name?
Oh, Andy Robinson?
Yeah, that was an ad-lib by Andrew Robinson. So instead of saying Jesus wept, he just licks his lips and...
Yeah, flicks his tongue back and forth across his teeth. Yeah. In a gesture of unrepentant lewdness. Yeah. Anyway, and then here's a moment that is echoed in the movie, but it's different because when we see Julia, she is dressed in her bridal gown,
And Kirsty thinks, poor Julia, she got stabbed, but she just had just enough energy to, crawl up to her wedding dress and put on her wedding dress, and then we find out differently.
Yeah, she's talking, she's asking for help, and the voice is coming from her lap, which is where her head is.
Yeah.
And in fact, the person in the bridal gown might not be Julia's body at all, because we see that beneath the veil is this strong pyramid-like head light glowing, and we see the veil rise, and then we hear, "I am the engineer." Yeah. So, there's an echo of this scene in Hellraiser when we see
Butterball,
the Chatterer.
Oh,
The Chatterer has like this veil on top of him, and then we see the veil lift by itself, and then of course Kirsty tries to escape. But yeah, I really like this idea of the engineer having this head that's like a miner's son, and she's trying to escape, and then she goes out of the house, and then as she's running down the street, the engineer comes out of nowhere, collides with her, and gives her the Le Marchand's box.
He kind of slips it to her because she doesn't realize that she's holding it until after he's walked by.
Yeah.
And, I think between Hellraiser and Hellbound Heart, I like them equally for different reasons. I mean, I think that I don't like the ending of Hellraiser quite as much as the ending of Hellbound Heart. I don't like that the Cenobites decide to go after Kirsty at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But I like the design of the Cenobites better, I think, in the movie than what's in the story.
I'm ambiguous about both designs because when you're reading a book, of course, your imagination is filling in the blanks and your imagination is putting them together. So I really think that as iconic as the movie Cenobites are, the literary ones are at a disadvantage because we don't have a visual fixed thing that we can talk about, but we have descriptions. And I mean, in my mind, they're pretty extreme.
Yeah.
And I particularly enjoy the one with the hooks transfixing his lips to his eyelids, and then when he talks, like his eyes like kind of flutter.
Yeah.
And I think that that is much more extreme than, for example, Grace Kirby as a female Cenobite. She just had like that thing in her throat, which it's pretty cool to see that. I understand, but the ones in the book seem to be even take it a little step forward because the suits are described as being sewn not only to but through their skin.
Well, and you do see that on Pinhead in Hellraiser.
You do. You see that thing where you see like flaps of skin are interlaced with flaps of leather and all that stuff. But of course, wow. They did a mask based on the first Cenobites.
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, they did a mask based on the first Cenobite. And actually, there are echoes of this first Cenobite in the computer game Jericho. You know that the creature that flies with like long fingers, and it shows up every once in a while in the game, and usually it like attacks us from above. Yeah. And they have that same thing, hooks through the eyes and through the cheeks to the mouth, and the hooks are like opening up those eyes really wide and stuff. So I really enjoy that description for the Cenobites here, almost as much as, of course, the ones from the movies, because in my mind I can imagine anything as extreme as I want. So there's also, of course, the advantage that the other ones have actual appearances that we can judge and that we can discuss, not the ones that are just words. But
and another interesting sort of motif in Hellraiser is that Frank jams his fingers into the base of the back of their neck, right at the base of their skull, and that's how he feeds. But in the Hellbound Heart, it's not like that. It's as long as the person dies on the floor, in there, then the blood sort of makes its way over, across the floor and under the wall, and it sort of dissolves, and he's absorbing it when it dissolves.
Yeah, he actually does that even before he comes out of the wall, even before he's resurrected and takes physical form. The room kind of like eats up the victim. It's like the room starts to warm up, and it's like almost like a furnace. And Julia can see the body kind of getting dissected in front of her eyes.
Yeah, and the room groans at one point.
Yeah. The room of the boards kind of like groan and creak at one point. So it's more of a transfer of energy than an actual sucking out. Because in the movie you get that sound where someone's sucking with a straw or something.
Yeah,
it's like...
yeah.
So you can hear that.
Yeah.
It's cool, I guess. It's a little more supernatural. In that regard, I think I prefer the movie version a little bit more because it's more hands-on. It's like, it's creepier. You see the guy like stick his fingers in the back of the head and all that stuff. It's it's gorier. I like that.
Yeah, it's and Hellraiser is a more intimate story. I mean, by making Julia the stepmother and Larry the father and Kirsty the daughter, it's a more intimate story than, and it all takes place in a shorter span of time. Yeah, and like they said in Hellbound, Hellraiser 2, it's like Kirsty is Snow White and Julia was the evil stepmother, and then she becomes the evil queen. Yeah. So, but one thing that's really cool is that of course, there are audiobooks of the Hellbound Heart. And one of the audiobook editions has Clive read the entire novel. Yeah, and actually that leads into our first reader comment. Andrew Kopp says, "Looking forward to it. I just wanted to mention the amazing audiobook version where Clive reads it himself. His Cenobite voice is chilling." It is chilling because it's so disembodied and so unemotional. It's almost like a drone. Whenever Clive is reading the lines from the Cenobites, it's like this. It's like, what city is this? Yeah, and it's like, partake of them. Yeah, do you understand? Yeah, and it's like, do you even know who we are? And it's like, make him confess himself. Yeah, it's really interesting because that's, you get exactly how Clive, I mean, not exactly, but, how Clive imagined it in his mind when he was writing the story.
What do you want? It asked him. He perused this questioner more confidently than he had the other two. His fear was draining away with every second that passed. Memories of the terrifying place beyond the wall were already receding. "Kershaw told me there will be 5 of you," Frank said. "The engineer will arrive, should the moment merit," came the reply. "Now again, we ask you, what do you want?" Yeah, and this brings us to other things like when Doug Bradley was doing Hellraiser, and Clive Barker was giving him some direction on how to interpret Pinhead. He said, "Dougie, I want you to say these lines as if the north wind was blowing through your eyes." So it's like it's a little Clive Barkian, but he was like, that was typical art direction. Stage direction, just like when we were in the Dog Company, he would come up with these things. And he was always saying, do less, do less, do less. Yeah, he was always trying to make him downplay the performance more. Of course, in the sequels of Hellraiser, that actually became like worse. It just became more and more and more until at one point you have Pinhead screaming and yelling and cutting people's heads off with a cleaver and stuff like that. But here it was supposed to be like. It really is supposed to be like when you see Pinhead rise from behind Kirsty, and he goes like, "We have such sights to show you." It's like, and in that blue mist and fog and that light, and being understated, it's like it's just creepy and kind of puts a chill down your spine, and it's a lot, it's so much better than like in Hellraiser 3, him running around and arguing with people and stuff. Yeah, and it's for example, I guess some people think, well, why don't the Cenobites when she
Of course, I'm referring to the movie. It's hard to talk about the novella without referencing the movie.
Yeah, we're not capable of it, but that's okay.
in the novella, this never happens because at the end, the Cenobites don't turn on Kirsty.
Yeah.
Nor does the engineer become a monster that tries to prevent her from escaping the house or anything.
Yeah.
But there is this thing that some people question, which is, well, when Kirsty is messing around with the box, and the Cenobites are like, no, don't do that. It's like, why don't they actually step up and do something?
And in Hellraiser 3, they tried to explain it by saying that, I can't take the box away from you. You have to give it to me.
Yeah. But in this book, in the novella, of course, it seemed to me that the Cenobites were these creatures that had to obey all these rituals, that they had strict rules that they had to adhere to, and they couldn't really, step out of those boundaries.
But once she opened the box, they sort of took control of it, right? Because that first Cenobite, he levitated the box up in the air, and it sort of closed itself back up again. You kind of got the feeling like, okay, you don't need this anymore because, we've got you now.
Yeah. But, so there's been some critical analysis of the novella. I've read some essays about it.
It's almost another Books of Blood story. I mean, it's like the same length as Rawhead Rex.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But there's one reference that I would like to quote, which involves, there's this guy called Jean Baudrillard, and he's this philosopher, and he's a sociologist, and he talks about consumer society and economy and stuff, and he has this fable that I think it's very. There's a quote that is very, very suiting to Frank, which is this fable from Jean Baudrillard called The Autopsy of Homo economicus. There is this whole section here where he says, he starts off by saying there was a man who lived in scarcity, and then he encounters a society of affluence. And then there's this quote, which is, in this fable, the man who is endowed with needs which direct him towards objects that give him satisfaction. Since this man is never really satisfied, for which, by the way, he is reproached, the same history is repeated indefinitely since the time of the ancient fables. And I think this applies so well to Frank, who's a man endowed with needs, which direct him towards the box that gives him satisfaction.
Yeah.
And, he's never really satisfied. So this story will be repeated indefinitely, which means that other people will find the box. Other people will do the same thing that Frank did. And, basically Hellbound Heart is a fable. I mean, it's
true.
a very...
You could never be happy with what you have.
Yeah, it's a Faustian tale of how you can't really expect to get a free lunch. You can't expect to, almost like you can't expect to have infinite pleasure without having some kind of cost. Mm-hmm. And I guess what I took out of this story was that, one, there's everyone, to quote Dr. Decker, everyone has a secret face. Mm. This is perfectly reflected in Julia. Julia is the perfect. She was ready to become content with living a normal married life, and then she meets Frank, and she's tainted, or more like a contagion kind of thing. Frank's appetite shows her that there can be more to life. Yeah. You can demand more of life.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, Clive Barker is so into the fantastic and so, turning away from the natural world and looking into these, fantastical things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he makes stories like this one and The Thief of Always that say basically if you can't be happy with the world that you live in, these are the consequences.
Yeah, I mean, even if you go into this fantasy world where it's Christmas every other day and you get presents every other day, you will get tired of it.
Yeah, and I think that's almost a children's Hellraiser, in a way.
Sure, yeah. That's actually I agree with that a lot. Yeah, it's like you can't expect, if you're not happy with the world as it is, even if you find a way to go to this paradise, you will always have to pay this terrible price at the end. It's like you will always be wanting for more.
Well,
until
and it even says it's a fable right on that book.
Yeah. And if you get more, it will come a point where more becomes too much. Nobody can withstand infinite happiness or infinite bliss.
Yeah.
You can't demand that from life.
And you can't have anything to compare it against. If life is always the same, it's always this perfect thing.
Yeah, and then of course there would be all these analysis that we could apply. I mean, I'm not a philosopher. I just dabble in some philosophy every once in a while. But there would be Deleuzian theories that we could apply here towards Frank and towards the Cenobites and what the Cenobites mean. Frank is the id and Rory is the superego or something like that. And, Pinhead is also... If you start applying things here, there are all sorts of models that you can fit to this story. Because this is such an archetypal story where you got a love triangle, you got a Faustian tale, you got, a morality tale, you got all these things here colliding to create such a nice, perfect little story, which, it's one of Clive's best works.
Yeah, and one that he's, Hellraiser is the thing that he's the most recognized for.
Yeah, I mean, it gave rise to all sorts of, comic books, more comic books, movies, I don't know, I mean, gosh, so much stuff is based on Hellraiser. Even fashion. I mean, I've seen stuff that mimics the Cenobites' clothing, like leather outfits, masks. I mean, it influenced a complete class of creators out there who have been influenced by Hellraiser. I mean, just go on DeviantArt, for example. Just pop in Hellraiser or Cenobite. You will find so many different designs there of people who, want to incorporate this into their own private little bestiary of the imagination.
Yeah.
Heck, I've created Cenobites. I've drew Cenobites, and I was like, oh, this guy's going to be called this and that, and, this is a little box that he's going to be connected to, and this will be a puzzle guardian, and there's a whole mythology that developed by itself.
Yeah. I mean, it gives you kind of a taste of something that's really, really interesting. And I think the reason that I've hated the sequels so much is because I love that mystery. And I don't want somebody telling me that the hell in Hellraiser is the Judeo-Christian hell.
Well, you're saying that, but according to Clive Barker, the Scarlet Gospels will feature Jesus and Lucifer, I think.
But it's also going to be in the context of probably the books of the art, right? So Jesus showed up in Everville.
Oh gosh, I need to reread that book again. I don't recall that.
Yeah, it was funny. Tesla, there was this religious lady that was giving her a hard time, and she said, "You know what? I met Jesus today, and your name didn't come up."
Oh, right. Yeah, I remember that quote. I don't remember the exact
I need to read it
context
again,
of it. I need to read it again. I just read Everville once, and I read it when it came out. So it's been a few.
That was me too. I reread the Great and Secret Show, and then I read Everville, and I think I've reread them one more time. Well, I mean, I've read the Great and Secret Show a lot, but I think I've reread Everville once, so I've read it a total of 2 times.
Well, I think that what she says is, I think I met Jesus this afternoon. At least he was walking on water and had a lot of scars, so it could have been him, right? So that's what she says. But I mean, for example, in Imagica, wasn't Jesus supposed to be one of the sons of Apexamendios?
Right, one of the reconcilers.
Yeah, one of the reconcilers. He was one of the reconcilers. I mean, so in that case, Gentle would also be a son of God.
Yeah.
it's interesting.
And in Everville, he introduced the story tree, and that we're all leaves on the story tree, and so Clive Barker's been sort of hinting at a unified theory that makes all of his stories work together.
Yeah,
and
so
I
can see that.
I'm thinking that when we see the Scarlet Gospels, all of that's gonna come more into place. And,
well, I hope so, because the Cenobites are also in Weaveworld, or mentioned in Weaveworld. So,
yeah.
I mean, the Fugue is also part of the same world where the Scarlet Gospels is going to be.
Yeah.
So it kind of you just start thinking about it.
Harry D'Amour ties hell in with the art and the Dream Sea and the Ephemeris.
Yeah, because one of the demons that he meets in Fleet Street is actually a guy from Quiddity or something, right?
Yeah.
At least I got that impression from Everville.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the guys that he met in Fleet Street was supposed to be a creature from across the, I don't know, what's it called, that dimension where Quiddity is? I mean, does it have a name? I only know that the islands are called the Ephemeris.
Yeah.
But I forgot if that whole dimension has some kind of name. I don't know.
Where the things are that are mountains and fleas, the Iad Ouroboros.
Yeah, well, that's like a name of an entity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I need to reread that stuff. I really need to reread the books of the art, because they're fucking amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like you keep on saving it until book 3 comes out, but that's a long time from now.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, Hellbound Heart is really, really... I recommend this book thoroughly. If you don't read anything else by Clive, you should read The Hellbound Heart.
Yeah.
And
also Ben Palmer said, my favorite book. So that was the only other comment that we had for this.
Yeah. So
episode.
Looking forward to Scarlet Gospels.
Yeah. And
New Genesis.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's thanks, that was really cool. I really love talking about this novel. And, if I think of anything else, I might, just post it later, I guess, somewhere.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure there's a lot of stuff. Over the years, I've talked so much about Hellraiser, especially in forums and things like that. And there was a time when I was so devoted to the Hellraiser series that I would, spend hours talking to other people like David, our friend David. Mm-hmm. We would discuss things on forums about, hey, what... is Rory in hell, or is he in heaven? Or are there angels in the universe of the Hellbound Heart? And, I guess people like to discuss this. Hopefully the Scarlet Gospels will bring some answers.
Well, and I think, that Hellbound Heart and Hellraiser both sort of agree on that one thing, is that the world of the Cenobites and their hell has nothing to do with our, our afterlife.
Right.
Like Rory, it's like she didn't see his reflection in the puzzle box like she saw Frank and Julia.
Yeah.
And she's like, he's somewhere else. Maybe some other puzzle somewhere else will, may help me find my way to him. But and then in Hellraiser 2, I think, when Frank says, "When you're dead, you're fucking dead."
Yeah.
But it's kind of...
But can we really trust...
They'd also planned on having him in hell, too, and it didn't work out.
But can we really trust Frank when he says that? That's my point, Can we really trust him? Is he really saying the truth?
He just doesn't know, right? I mean...
Yeah.
That was my interpretation, is he doesn't know what happens to people when they die. He just knows about the Cenobites and the Labyrinth and...
Yeah, the whole point is, I think, that Frank is, you should take what he says just with a grain of salt, because Frank is Frank. Yeah. Frank will say anything to, hurt Kirsty or to take hope away from her. But here's the funny thing, which, of course, we will talk about this later. But in the beginning, it was not supposed to be Frank that shows up to Kirsty in Hellbound 2.
Right.
It was actually supposed to be Larry, her dad.
But Andrew Robinson was busy with something else.
Yeah, and then there was no money, and they rewrote everything. So, but anyway, so the Hellbound Heart, I really like it. It's very, very. It's a kind of prose that's almost like poetry. I mean, this is what I used to this is what I used to describe Clive Barker's prose as. It has this kind of like music to it. Mm-hmm. When you're reading it, it's like, he doesn't say something like, "Oh, the Cenobites didn't need any other words to do it." He just says they needed no further invitation to raise the curtain. And then he says, it doesn't say like the world beyond the door had disappeared. He says the world beyond the threshold had disappeared. Yeah. So it's very flourished. I mean, it's a very flourished language. I really enjoyed reading this.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. I mean, and Weave World is probably the biggest. For that kind of thing, Weave World is one of the biggest. That opening paragraph.
Yeah.
Nothing ever begins.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's, what can I say? It's a great book.
Yeah.
And if you just like allow your imagination to run free when you're reading it, you will definitely create a great Hellraiser movie in your mind.
All right. Well, I think we've kind of come to the end.
Follow us on Twitter. Listen to us on iTunes. Give us a review.
Oh, actually, I do have one Twitter comment.
Oh, great.
From @PNEDOTIE. PNEDOTIE. He says, had my copy signed by Clive in person a couple of years ago. Hopefully you might also compare contrast versus the movie. Okay. I think we got that covered.
Yeah. It's difficult to talk about the novella without mentioning the movie. I mean,
it's a frame of reference for every, no matter how casual of a Clive Barker fan you are, you've probably seen Hellraiser.
Yeah, I guess it must be rare to have a fan out there who read the book before he saw the movie.
Yeah.
All right, we'll be here next week.
Yep, it'll be our special wedding episode.
Yeah, Sarah was saying hi, Ryan.
Hi, Sarah.
So he says hi, Sarah. She says, "Thank you for giving me a break from Jose for a couple of hours."
Oh yeah, right.
All right. Okay. Thanks a lot. Right. And next episode is going to be on location from Las Vegas.
Yeah. Yep.
So stay tuned.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. So intent was Frank upon solving the puzzle of Le Marchand's box that he didn't hear the great bell begin to ring. The device had been constructed by a master craftsman, and the riddle was this, that though he'd been told the box contained wonders, there simply seemed to be no way into it. No clue on any of its 6 black, lacquered faces as to the whereabouts of the pressure points that would disengage one piece of this 3-dimensional jigsaw from another.